So it's not for kids.
Like grin unbearingly like the Joker the whole time. I just sound like completely strained, like I just can't stop squeezing my cheeks together.
Which cheeks?
Oh, you know which cheeks.
I was reading some kind of book and they were like, the reason that you're aiming bad is because your butt cheeks are too clenched. But apparently that's a real thing.
Wait, what? Say that again. The
reason you're aiming bad with your gun is because your butt cheeks are clenched. You need to release your butthole to aim good.
And this wasn't JoJo's Bizarre Adventure where you were reading this?
No. If anybody knows about guns, let me know. Because we're definitely not the right people to...
I've shot a gun before. Speak for yourself.
Yeah, you know how to aim good without clenching your butthole?
I think so. Kinda.
Look, the closest I've gotten to guns are these babies right here. Mwah. I'm kissing my pecs.
For your listeners at home.
What muscle is that?
Kenny is kissing his biceps and apparently needs to go back to medical school to learn which muscles he has.
No, I'm not kissing my pecs. I know I've just aroused like 80% of the audience, but...
Oh, no.
I don't know if I could reach. Let me try.
Ever since like last week, I just keep thinking about how like your mom listens to this podcast and just like I just imagine her shaking her head right now, like thinking about this stunt that you're doing.
Are you gonna do another my mom French accent? Like,
no, I've offended her enough. I think with that, I don't even know what I could do. Kenny, you need to stop kissing your pectorals, Kenny.
It's funny you mentioned my mom because we got a Project Mom update.
Yes, that's what I'm here for.
So we got to play summer camp. And that was my selection for deck building introduction. She must have said at least like 7 or 8 times, like, this is not like the other games that you've shown me, Kenny.
In a bad way?
Yeah, I interpreted that as like the concept of deck building was very unique and revolutionary for her. And also the second way I interpreted it was she did not like this. And it wasn't because she didn't understand it. By the end of it, she like understood the flow. She was playing it just fine. And it was actually a pretty close game. It was just not her cup of tea. As a general rule of thumb, like building the engine and the synergies and stuff really wasn't interesting to her. And maybe over time, this will be something that emerges as something more interesting. But for her, she really likes the spatial puzzles. Mm-hmm. And she likes figuring out how to put things in like arrangements and in positions. She does not like reading a bunch of text on cards and figuring out how those cards go together. Actually, funnily, geez.
So you want some funnily cake?
Hilariously enough, we were like 10 minutes into the game and then she was like, oh, there's text on these cards. Let me put my glasses on. So she was just buying stuff willy-nilly.
She was going on vibes only.
She's like, going on picture and vibes only.
Yeah.
This is one she doesn't want to go back to. My mom not having any sort of that history, Dominion was going to be a real hard sell. Not impossible, but it would be jumping a few steps. So I went with another Phil Walker Harding design, just like Sushi Go. And I'm starting to feel like Phil Walker Harding is maybe not the thing.
He's really good at boiling stuff down, maybe, but not perhaps on really being able to sell it to your mom in particular.
Maybe it's not my mom. Maybe Phil Walker Harding sells the idea of games for families, but then actually they're just like too boring. Maybe it's all a facade. And the only reason people like Phil Walker Harding games is because they think that the other people would like them or something.
Maybe there's something to be said for the idea that Phil Walker Harding is not targeting us, the nerds.
Yes, yeah.
And it's like, you have to think like, I've only ever played Cards Against Humanity with my roommate. And now I'm in Target and I'm seeing Sushi Go on this shelf, you know? I'm the person that's going to be reading the rules, right? I haven't been introduced to this wider world per se.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the person it works best for, possibly.
But
I
again,
don't know.
that would be kind of like my mom, and she was super bored playing Sushi Go, right? Like
true.
The only 2 games that we've played as part of the Project Mom so far that she's been like, I didn't like this and I don't want to go back to it, is Sushi Go and Summer Camp, both by Phil Walker Harding.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on glue, or whatever they say.
Now that's a reference.
Yeah.
You giving me crap about the
That's a reference for like 3 people to get. Yeah, and I'm going way deeper. Yeah. We'll let our listeners try and figure that one out. DM us on Blue Sky if you really need the answer.
That was our experience with Summer Camp and deck building. And now we'll start the show. Welcome to Shelf Stable, a podcast celebrating board games that have stood the test of time. I'm your host, Kenny Katayama.
And I'm the other host, Tom Bowers. Today, feature topic is language independent design. What the fuck does that even mean? But before we talk about that, let's just talk about some of the stuff we've been playing recently. Kenny?
I got to play Stone Age a lot from 2008. This is Brunnhofer, published by Z-Man in the US. And this is like the quintessential worker placement game. I think Stone Age was part of the very early age of worker placement. So Agricola came out in 2007, and then Stone Age came out in 2008. You are entirely focused on the worker placement. That's the core of the game. The theme is caveman times. This is like the Neolithic era, and you are trying to make your tribe. What do you call cave people? Tribes?
I don't know. they probably had tribes going on back then.
Yeah, you try to make your tribe the most healthy and thriving.
And you do this by achieving victory points. Mm-hmm.
So there's a bunch of spots. There's a spot where you can make babies. You put 2 of your workers, and then out comes a little worker.
I just need to point out to people that was not a soundboard effect. That was Kenny just doing that into the mic.
You can go and find different resources, and then you can spend those resources to build different huts. I'd say the one big gimmick with this game versus some of the other worker placement games that came out around the time is that there is a variable earning factor. When you go to a location, you roll a die for each worker that you have at that location. Based on what your rolls are, you get a certain amount of that particular resource that you're trying to get. It's not entirely known how something is going to go. You kind of have to like wager how well you're going to do in each location. You can get these tools, and the tools are like modifiers for the dice. But other than that, you're kind of at the mercy of the dice. And that's both a good and a bad thing. Sometimes you can just really get screwed over, and it feels like you straight up have like lost the game or have had taken a significant hit to the game just because you rolled snake eyes, you know. But other times it can be nice because you really don't know, like the game's not solved. You kind of have to weigh out the luck of certain things happening and take some chances, and that can be exciting. I know a lot of people are turned off by that. I think it's a plus ultimately. The times where things really just straight up go bad are few and far between. And I would say even then they're not like game ending. Tom, I feel like you and I played this once a long time ago.
Yeah, probably back in like 2008. I'm just kidding. It's been a long time since I've picked this one up. I'd be curious to come back to it. It's almost like a Catan at this point. You just take it for granted almost how much work it's done. You just assume that like other games, you know, have just surpassed it. But then you come back, you revisit a game like this, and you realize like how much thought and care was actually put into the design. That there's actually like a lot of sort of subtleties about it. That's what I would suspect is kind of going on with this one.
Yeah, it feels like it's very fine-tuned. It's very tight. The whole point of this podcast is kind of appreciating the history of games. I think this is the kind of game that exemplifies that. It's one of those games that, like you said, kind of just reminds you like this pulled a lot of weight back in the day, and it still kind of holds up. We need to like appreciate some of the things that are out there, because it's very easy to get caught up in the latest worker placement game. I mean, worker placement games are a dime a dozen nowadays. a lot of what fuels modern worker placement games, which I'm not saying is worse, I'm just saying it's different, is the systems that are in those games. It's all about like adding either thematic or mechanical systems that layer on top of or in conjunction with the worker placement. Whereas a game like Stone Age was focused entirely on that one core system and just making it as fun as possible. And there's something that can be like really fun about just focusing on something and being able to almost Zen like zero in on it versus being kind of inundated with all these different systems and trying to parse out what the line of play is within that inundation. So that was Stone Age.
All right, well, Kenny, well, that was really cool or whatever. I got a duel game for you before we even started calling them the duel. And that's Carcassonne, the Castle from 2003. This is designed by none other than Reiner Knizia. And of course, Klaus Jurgen-Wrede did Carcassonne itself. I think Reiner Knizia was like, yo, can I do a cool spin-off? And he was like, hell yeah. Published by Hans im Gluck. This is an out-of-print game that when you told me about it, I was like, what? Reiner Knizia made a Carcassonne? And you were like, yeah, and it's kind of hard to find. And then I looked on eBay and there was like a $40 copy right there. So kind of expensive for what this game is. Not like crazy hard to acquire from my experience. Maybe I got lucky. Carcassonne the Castle is Carcassonne for exactly 2 players. That's it. That's the review. There you go. I mean, what's interesting about it? What's different about it from regular Carcassonne? The biggest difference is that there is a scoring track that has a really funky ziggity-zaggity shape, and it's really kooky setting it up every time because all the perimeter pieces need to be set up in a particular order so that the scoring track makes sense. And it has this very unique shape. So it's kind of annoying, honestly, to even set it up. And it's kind of takes up a lot of table space for it being something that's supposed to be 2-player only. So not like ideal if you're looking for a game to like bring on a date, unless you really like, I guess you could argue that like this is like a peacocking move of sorts with board gaming. If you have like a suspicion that your date,
what?
Have you heard this term? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I understand the term. I just go on.
Just imagine you go out on a date with like a girl who you think is like into board games and you're like, I got a great 2-player game for us, babe. Yeah. And then you like pull this out and it's like Reiner Knizia on the box. And then it takes up like the entirety of the IHOP table that you reserved for your date, despite the fact that no one else is there at 11 p.m. I don't know why you're going to IHOP.
You're making a lot of assumptions here.
This is just how I do things, I guess, you know?
You're talking from a first person.
Yeah.
Because, you're
telling me this is not universally applicable?
You're going on a date with a girl and you're calling her babe, and then you're at an IHOP. Like, there was already, like, this is so narrow. I mean, we could also make this gender neutral too while we're at it,
true,
not
true.
at IHOP.
Sorry, IHOP, not sponsored. Okay, so let's back it up a little bit, okay? You're going out on a date and you suspect that the guy you met on Grindr is really into, okay? Like the fact is, I feel like if I told the story like that, I'd be like appropriating someone else's lifestyle, okay? I'm just
use
speaking
gender
from my
neutral
experience.
language.
I'll try to be better. I'm sorry. What were we fucking talking about? It has this crazy setup, okay? And then on these perimeter, on the scoring track, there's all these corners, which is like...
Hold on, wait, pause. You need to finish your thought about how this is peacocking, though.
Well, because it takes up like the whole table, and it just like, and it has this weird setup.
And it's Reiner Knizia?
And it's Reiner Knizia, so it's like, and it's old and it's out of print. So it's like a ton of ways in which you're like showing off to your date. But this only works if they are someone that listens to this podcast. and then with that person who you're bringing out on a date, that's the person that you are flexing, you're peacocking, you're showing off your schmoves.
Yeah,
you're like, check it out. It's a Reiner Knizia that you probably never heard of.
Okay, here's the problem. If they're a huge fan of this podcast and they've listened to this episode, which means they've already heard this scenario and therefore they wouldn't be as impressed with it.
I'm sorry. I fucked it up for everyone, really. Now you got to find something else.
Yeah.
maybe Risk Express.
That is like the logical continuation of this.
Right. The reason the perimeter has such a weird shape is because it creates all these corners where there's two numbers right next to each other that could allow you to pick up a special tile. But you have to land on exactly one of those two numbers, like 27, 28, for example. You need to get exactly that score, and then you can pick up this tile. Most of the time, it basically just like doubles or adds one to something else that you score. Steers you in a particular direction or whatever. But the core gameplay it's still Carcassonne. The one other interesting thing, I suppose, is that there's like this rivalry between you and your opponent, where you're like whoever scored the biggest thing. They
not interesting.
You score all the empty space. So you're like purposely trying to leave a big blob in the middle of emptiness. I feel like it's a little bit of a miss compared to the original Carcassonne, because I think what I like about Carcassonne is seeing like the cool way that your town like spreads out. And because like part of this game like actually encourages having a huge black hole, it just feels weird. Overall, I mean, you played this with me. I mean, I'm curious what you thought.
I thought it was fine. I kind of feel the same way as you. I wouldn't play this over regular Carcassonne if I had to choose between the two. I did like some of the introductions that they put into it. When we played this at the IHOP, and I was just so hard because of you demoing this for me, the thing that stood out to me the most was the getting the bonus tiles by landing specifically on a certain score. That definitely was like the most interesting change or addition that they made to the Carcassonne formula. Other than that, it's just like Carcassonne.
Yeah, I think you could almost go further with the idea of like having to create an exact score in order to get the most out of something, which I suppose he's sort of like Knizia has sort of explored with things like what's that fucking game called? Yes, thank you. Cascadero is like a good example. So if you really like that mechanic, you could try that one out instead. Don't worry, I guess, out there, if you're listening to this and you're thinking like, oh, there's a Reiner Knizia game variant of Carcassonne. Not sure that you're missing out on all that much, really. My cock was not blown off by this one.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. If you go like cuckoos for Cuckoo Puffs for every Carcassonne expansion, then by all means go for this.
Yeah. If you're trying to be the Carcassonne completionist, you should get this one.
I was just so aroused by your peacocking that I couldn't really focus on the game, to be honest. So,
yeah, well, in that sense, it was kind of a big win for me. That was Carcassonne the Castle from 2003.
Tom got to play a big game of Wavelength from 2019. This is Alex Hague, Justin Vickers, and Wolfgang Warsch, CMYK. The first two names are the usual CMYK crowd, and then Wolfgang Warsch is famously the designer of Quacks.
A game we love, notably.
Wavelength is a party game where you have a dial, like a gauge, kind of like on an old car, and it will randomly point to a certain percentage or degree on that dial, and then you have to give a word that will get people exactly to point at that degree or angle on the dial. Let's say it's like 80% of the way to the right, and your category is from mild to spicy. You would do some kind of like hotter sauce, but not the hottest hot sauce in the world. Of course, this creates some very, I would say, Family Feud moments. I think the very first one that we got was flexible to hard. And I just was like, oh God, like, am I really going to start it this way? So I said an erect penis, and everybody got it. I wouldn't be surprised if in like 5-10 years, there's like a TV version of this game being played. And then like Steve Harvey is like, name a thing that, anyway.
I like that he needs to quit the highly successful Family Feud in order to get in on the Wavelength hype that is eventually going to
No,
occur.
He would do it as an additional, like he would just film it in the same studio.
Gotcha.
It's worth noting that CMYK actually has cut a deal with one of the TV broadcasting stations, and they will be doing a reality TV show. I don't think it's Wavelength though. I think it's Figment. I think it's based around Figment or like a brand new game. But I could be wrong. It could be Wavelength, and we're just talking literally about what's coming out. So I think this game always kind of creates a lot of both arguments and laughter. I have a question for you, Tom.
Yeah.
One hit wonder to pop sensation. Where would you put Tool?
Pop sensation.
Because that's really hard to think about, right? Yeah.
I know the pieces fit. It's like the only song by them that I really know, to be honest. And I'm sorry if you're listening to this and you're like, what? Tom's not a total Tool head?
They call them Toolies. They're like Swifties, you know.
The Toolies out here. Probably like closer to pop sensation, but like still ish in the middle.
Yeah, you're pretty much on the dot. So there you go. We demonstrated how Wavelength works.
Okay.
It is kind of amazing how often you are close, despite feeling like there's no way we're going to get this. So there's something to be said for that. If you like these kind of games, you could do a lot worse. I think Wavelength is a hoot. Always creates good discussions and laughter.
Helena really, really likes this game, and I honestly don't bring it out to the table as much as I could. I think my issue with it, like the reason it doesn't come out more often, is mostly you just don't even keep track of score or anything. And so, that becomes like some sort of pointless endeavor, I suppose. And I think that's actually my frustration with the game, is that like the game loop is fun and interesting enough, but there's the payoff of like winning as a group or winning as a team, because it's a team-oriented game, is not really there. There's no sort of, there's no finality to it.
I agree that a party game is better when it has a legit scoring system. Same goes for like dexterity games. But I don't think it's necessary, I guess is what I'm saying.
I just wish there was something, I think, like more final about the experience that you could point to and be like, and feel like you achieve something a little bit more. I do think that the core, like the mechanic of the trying to get people to guess like where to put the line is interesting and fun. But it's like, it's not quite enough to make me like excited to want to play this at every party for some reason. It's just missing something.
That was Wavelength from 2019.
Okay, Kenny. And then we held hands in the IHOP. That actually is the name of the game, not the IHOP part, but ... and then we held hands. That's a game from 2015. This is designed by David Chircop and Todd Sanders, published by LudiCreations. This one notably has art done by Marie Cardois. Is she actually French? I don't know.
It just looks like a French name.
But she's famous for Dixit, probably. Most people would be familiar, at least, with her work on that game and the card art. And so that same kind of like somewhat abstract, kind of emotive art style, I'd say, where it's not really about like some particular idea, but more about how the expression of the combination of objects makes you feel. That's what's going on in this game. Box art's really pretty. It's like blue, and then there's like these birds, but they're made out of hands flying around on the box, for example. Stuff like that. What is this game? It's a 2-player game, and it's an abstract game. The puzzle that you and your fellow player are trying to solve is, can you handle the emotions of your relationship and find balance and center yourselves while shifting perspective left and right as you traverse kind of a network of these different emotions. And that sounds really weird, and it is, but the actual gameplay is very much like driven by a puzzly card action system. You have these cards. On one side is one emotion, on the other side of the face of the card is another emotion, and actually they all get covered up so that only like the left sides are showing or only the right sides are showing. And what happens is, as your marble moves on this board, it's like a bunch of circles. So there's an outer circle with a smaller one inside and an even smaller one at the center, and a bunch of nodes. As you traverse those nodes, if you go to the left or the right, your emotion cards flip sides. So you're no longer like looking at the emotions on the left side, you're looking at the emotions on the right side. And so it's kind of interesting because you'll have a card that'll say something like depression or something, or loss. Sad is on the left side and angry is on the right side. And I think those are the four like core emotions are like sad, angry, calm, and happy. And calm and happy are positive, and sad and angry are negative emotions. And I don't think the game is trying to make a statement that those are like bad things. It's just that they pull you in a different direction. And so to be emotionally balanced, I guess, in at least the world of this game, you need to make moves that land you on happy or calm nodes about as often as you end up on angry and sad nodes.
Is there a horny expansion?
I wish. It would probably help me out a lot. But you're trying to like balance yourself between those two modes, right? And then at the same time, like navigate this center board. And at first it feels kind of easy. In fact, I played this with Taylor, and she and I were both kind of like, well, this is like going to be like a, walk in the park, because there's just so many nodes on the outer ring for you to navigate that it doesn't seem like particularly challenging. Oh, and the interesting thing is that you can use the other player's cards. And so we were just like not running into that challenge at all. Then we moved into the middle ring, and there's less nodes. And it was like starting to dawn on us how much more difficult this was going to get. It becomes like a lot more tricky to balance things and actually like, move around the board successfully. Really cool abstract game. I think Taylor in particular, I'd be remiss to mention that she felt it was weird that like all the emotions got like reduced to these four like fundamental ideas. And I'm kind of with her on that, but at the same time, I'm like, on some level, you'll literally need to abstract what you're even talking about in a game like this in order to make a game out of it. But I think it sort of works if you think of it more like happy, sad, angry, and calm are sort of like the center of a sort of wheel. And so it's not so much that like these other emotions are just one or the other. It's more like they can be categorized underneath. I think that was what the idea they were going for there. Mm-hmm. Not to say like, oh yeah, just because you're depressed, you're sad and angry and there's nothing else to it. It plays out more elegantly than I at first thought, even just playing it. I was just like, I don't see the challenge here. And then it was like the sensation of like actually trying to balance and actually move around each other was like much more apparent and more difficult. The closer we got to each other, the more difficult it became to play our own emotion cards on our turn to get to where we wanted to be.
I didn't get to play this, but I did see you and Taylor play it. Usually I get somewhat of a good idea of how a game works just by looking at it on the table. I had no idea what the heck was going on when I saw this game. It looked like Alien Checkers or something like that. And I think that's as a positive. I think it's really interesting and curious when a game feels so abstracted or so bizarre or alien-like. Makes me want to like pursue it more. The last time I felt that way was like PAX Penning, where I was just like, what is this? I don't think every game needs to be like that, but I do think it's an intriguing and like, kind of thing about this game. So I am interested in trying it out.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. That's the game. And then we held hands from 2015.
100 games to play before you die.
That's right, Kenny. The 100 games that you need to play before you kick the bucket. Game number 32 is Chronicles of Crime from 2018. Kenny, why is Chronicles of Crime on the list? What the hell is this game?
Chronicles of Crime is on the list because of two reasons. One is it represents the detective game. If you're familiar with like Sherlock Holmes, Consulting Detective, even some of like the escape room games, things like that. It kind of fits in that category where you're trying to solve a puzzle and you're getting given a bunch of information. The other reason it's on the list is because it is a app-assisted game, and I would argue one where the app really plays a part without just straight up becoming the game itself and almost veering into video game territory. So I think it meshes those two aspects very well and is representative of both. And so this was a good opportunity to fit two things in one onto the list. Full disclaimer, this is made by Lucky Duck Games. Lucky Duck is somewhat associated with the game store that we go to, as well as some of the folks we play games with. The way it works is you have these QR codes on different people, locations, objects related to whatever murder or case that you're investigating. And you get to elect which ones you go and speak to or go and visit to get more information. Every time you go and get evidence, you are ticking down a timer. So you basically have some kind of like number of actions that you can take before certain events trigger. And then before ultimately the quote unquote murderer gets away or something like that. And so you have to be careful about what exactly you're going to be doing and follow certain lines of logic or intuition. What'll happen is as you go and speak to people, they'll tell you, why don't you go and check this place out? And you actually go and pull an additional card from the location deck and add it. Or when you go to a location, you look around and you see a piece of evidence. And so you pull that piece of evidence out. So it kind of feels like a choose your own adventure combined with a deduction logic puzzle kind of game where you're over time accumulating more and more of these locations and actions, as well as more information. And ultimately you need to go and determine what's going on before the next crime happens, for example. I think this is a nice little package. It really just does everything that you think it would, and it does so in a very approachable way that immediately gets you to the fun part. You're not having to learn a bunch of rules. You're not trying to figure out what the intent of the game is or what the flow is like. You're just kind of in the thick of it. That's Chronicles of Crime from 2018.
Okay, Kenny, well, enough of that bullshit. Whatever the fuck you've been yapping about this whole time. Lucky Duck, some people that publish like a game. It's always got like an app integration going on. They made like Monster Yummy Tummy or something some years ago. We were holding hands in the IHOP. I don't know. None of that matters. No one cares because it's time to get into the real meat and potatoes of the podcast, the part of the episode that people come back week after week to actually hear us talk about. And that is the main topic. They don't care about the stuff that we've been playing recently. No one cares. Everyone skips it. Okay. It's time to talk about language independent design.
If you missed Tom's review of Carcassonne the Castle, Tom had some great tips about how to peacock on a first date. So
at an IHOP, yeah. It only works at IHOP.
Language independent design.
No, you know what? Fuck this topic. Now we're just doing restaurant tier lists. No, I'm just kidding.
Language independent gameplay. This is like when you don't need to read or understand a specific language to play a game.
But Kenny, how will I read the instruction books?
I mean, with the exception of the instructions. I'm saying like the game itself, you could play it and there's nothing limiting you. So the first thing I want to distinguish between is games that are language independent versus games that use language independent symbology. Because we're going to talk about both. And I would argue that I have different opinions about the two. So language independent games is like chess, like Xerts or something like that. A lot of abstracts. These are games where there's no text, there's no cards usually, or, there's very limited components that require any sort of like processing. You usually universally are like just using the components themselves to play them. A lot of abstract games are like this. Also some kids games, some party games, and then some dexterity games. I would say most dexterity games, actually. These games are great because you can play them. You can play them even if there's a language barrier, and people will typically be able to internalize the rules fast enough just by you demonstrating them. You could literally be playing them in a kind of like linguistic adjacent space where everybody's involved, everybody understands what's going on. I'm sure we've all had that experience where you play like slapjack with a foreign exchange student. An experience everyone has had. Did I lose you again?
No, sorry.
Were you just dumbfounded by my statement?
Yeah.
Everybody has had a game of slapjack with an international student that's visiting for the holidays.
You have?
I haven't personally, but I'm just saying everybody has.
Oh, I haven't either. So
I think these games are...
I have had a game of Uno.
Yeah. You need to know numbers for Uno, though.
I think everyone knows numbers, Kenny.
Not little kids. The parsing of the symbol for number is language.
But like also not really, because like they're at this point in the world, I'm pretty sure they are like universally recognized. You know?
No, I know, but I'm saying you still need to understand the numbers, though.
Well, yeah, but like that. I'm just saying, like, I think every language.
Like kids don't understand numbers yet. Like a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old.
A 3-year-old probably understands numbers more or less. They understand some of the numbers.
I guess they don't like. There's also like a certain level where it's like if you can't tell what number it is, you probably don't know how to count either.
But okay. Counterpoint though, in Uno, the numbers don't actually matter unless they match. Oh, that's true.
Right? Yeah.
So it's actually just a funny symbol anyway.
True. Okay, you got me. Yeah, I would say Uno is language independent.
Why are they numbers in Uno?
Why are there numbers? Is there some kind of scoring we don't know about?
There is scoring, yes. Actually, yes. And it is based on the numbers. I was like trying to figure that out just now. Yeah. And I just remembered, yeah. So you play until a player has reached 500 points, whoever has the lowest score wins.
I mean, if you're playing with scoring, if you're playing Uno with scoring, you're probably a serial killer, I feel like.
Yeah.
Or at least like a pervert.
Guilty as charged.
No, they're not. I'm not saying they correlate. Like you're not like if you're a pervert, you play with scoring. I'm just saying you might be a pervert if you play with scoring.
This is like a Foxworthy stand-up routine. Just like you might be a pervert if you use the scoring rules in Uno.
Oh, Tom.
You might be a pervert if you're peacocking on a first date in IHOP.
This is why we keep you on the show.
Yeah.
All right. So that's all good. I honestly, games that are language independent at their core, there's only goods, no bads, in my opinion. So let's talk about the bigger elephant in the room. Language independent symbology. This is, I would say, a hot button topic. It's something that people have argued quite a bit about on the internet and in our game group. So what do I mean when I'm talking about language independent symbology? I think the most iconic, no pun intended, example of this is the icons on Race for the Galaxies cards. How there's like 8 million hieroglyphics and you have to understand what each one means. And when you understand them, it's great. But until then, you're just looking at a bunch of alien-like symbols. There are other games that do this quite a bit. Basically, a lot of modern Euros of that flavor. Terraforming Mars, although we'll talk about Mars in a second because they do also have text. This is a common practice, and we'll talk about why here. The obvious pro is it reduces costs. So this is very much a publisher-based pro. And the main explanation for why companies do this. If you only print one set of cards, you can print them at a higher volume, and then you can use those cards in literally every copy of your game, regardless of the language. If you have to have card text that explains each card, now you have to do translations, and you have to do those cards independently for each language that you're doing the translations for.
Right.
Very simple and sweet. That's the reason that companies do this. Like, sure, there's other incentives, but like that is the reason.
Like, if you want to be able to get this out in as many languages as possible, and the only thing you have to translate from printing to printing is the rule book, that is ideal, it seems.
Yep.
It makes sense.
Printing a rule book is much easier to do in larger batches because you're basically doing a sheet manual, maybe a few folds, a few staples, versus cutting out cards.
Yeah.
Or changing a board. The other benefits with the language independent gameplay, this is a game that you can play across languages. This is also a game that you can much more easily teach to someone that is maybe the primary language is not their go to. It's a language that they learned, or that maybe they're still learning. You're able to kind of bridge that gap much more easily, and it allows you to play games that otherwise wouldn't be possible. I don't even want to approach Carl Chudik's innovation with a non-native speaker who's still learning English, because there's just so much text and you have to kind of parse what that text even means. However, I would play similar difficulty, complexity level tableau builders with the same individual. Like I would play Race for the Galaxy with that same person, because once they understand what those symbols mean, they're good to go. And they could even like look up the PDF of the rules for their language and then be able to go and play the game. Okay, so that's one of the big benefits. The other one is simplicity of rule set, simplicity of understanding. So if we go back to this example, if you're looking at a card in innovation, you basically have to, or like a card in Magic, you have to read a bunch of this text of what it does. Yeah, there might be some glossary term shortcuts and things like that, but even then you're like reading, you're processing each card. And that can be a little bit overwhelming when you are trying to figure out how to even just play the game or do well at the game. Now you have to do this additional part, which is internalize what these cards even mean. In these icon-based games, for the most part, you look at the icons, you're like, oh, okay, I've already internalized what that icon means. I'm good to use this card. It almost feels like it's automated to a certain extent. So I'd say that's the other big benefit.
Well, I'm going to argue with you on that one a little bit here. And maybe it's a semantic thing, because you said it's a simplicity thing. In a certain sense, I think you're right that an icon on a card text box, you're saying simplifies, it condenses information down quite a bit. But there's always that translation layer.
Right.
Like, unless the icon is like just pure recognizable, like, and by that I mean like it get an icon so universal, like the save button, where it's just like it's immediately recognizable because of its ubiquity. It has to be at that level for it to be, I think, like a simplification. And most of the time it's not.
A good example is when there's a picture of a card, and that means draw card, or like a card with a plus.
Yeah, that might be like the only one, honestly.
Well, when you gain a resource, if it's just a picture of that resource.
Oh, with like a plus icon?
Yeah, or even if it has like the rainbow icon, or like some kind of like conglomeration of all the resources, it's pretty clear, like you get to get a resource of whatever type you want. Some other things that are pretty universal is like an arrow or a colon to represent if you do this, then do this.
Cost
I think
those relationship.
Yeah, you don't really need to look at the rule book to understand what that means. A slash to mean either this, or the like a multiplier. The multipliers get a little weird though, so maybe I'll leave that one out. There are these things that you can kind of just adopt as part of your lexicon, as part of your
the gamer language
that translate from game to game and can start to make things a little bit simpler to parse. But like Tom is alluding to, there are a lot of these icons that don't make any sense, or at least don't make sense on first blush, and then you are starting to defeat the purpose of these icons. The thing I especially hate is icons that are only used once on one card, that are kind of a conglomeration of other icons to represent something that could have been written out in text, but that they're like, well, everything else is an icon, so let's make a new icon for this.
You're saying they made like a compound icon, but only for one use case?
Yeah, and Race for the Galaxy is very guilty of this. It has tons of these like symbols where it uses other symbols in the game and to signify what the card's ability is. Usually it will include text at the bottom right of the card that explains what they mean by the symbology, but some of the symbology is like buck wild. I start to feel like there's no purpose to the icons at that point, and maybe we're moving into the cons here.
Well, it's interesting what you're talking about, because like I just this weekend gave a presentation on, and this is relevant, so bear with me, a presentation on this programming language called Wiwa, right? And Wiwa, if you look it up, you can go to their website and see pictures of it, wiwa.org. It is a glyph like driven language. You can type things out in plain English, but when you run the code, it is written and read in these glyphs. And they look almost like math symbols mostly. This is a really good time for this topic to be coming up because one of the things about Weewa is that like it looks like it's some sort of foreign language and therefore it's going to be like really hard to understand. But once you put in a bit of practice into knowing what the glyphs mean and how the language works, it starts to make like more and more intuitive sense. And I think the same could be said for like mathematics, like in general. You know, the first time you see multiplication, you had that spelled out for you in some way at some point. And by now it's like so, you know, common and easy to understand for you now that, you know, you take it for granted almost. And the more difficult math concepts that maybe you and I like don't deal with a ton, for example, like whatever that squiggly line is that I can't even think of the name for right now, that I always see in calculus. It looks like a big S almost. What's that called?
Called a question mark.
Yeah. Anyway, or like musical notation, for example. Like there's all sorts of ways in which like glyphs can become their own sort
like
of language.
The music question mark?
In a way, yeah, the music question mark. It's like these glyphs become a language of their own, and so compound structures end up like occurring eventually, I'd say, more or less. And you need to be grounded in those basic glyphs in order to understand those compound glyphs. But I do think in a board game in particular, it's rare that like you can sort of guide people through that experience so that by the time they reach a card that has a compound glyph, that they're going to be able to understand it based on prior exposure to all the other glyphs. Like you would have to take a very particular type of game setup to get someone through that type of a journey. And that's where it loses people, right? My point in bringing all this up is like, it could work in some scenarios, but you have to be really purposeful, I think, to really actually think of it as constructing almost a second language for people and not expose them to ideas like those compound words unless you're purposely doing it. Like if Race for the Galaxy had like a beginner's deck, and then it was like, and now you're ready for the advanced deck after like one or two games of that. It's like, then those compound glyphs might be more intuitive.
Maybe that's what they were trying to do with Jump Drive, because Jump Drive uses the same icons and it's like the beginner's Race for the Galaxy. But I don't know.
Tom Lehman's just trying to write his own like glyph language at this point.
Yeah, pretty much.
So he's like, I need kindergarten for these fools. So he made
I think it's important to recognize the culture with which people consume games. And for the most part, people are often learning games for the first time. It's few and far between the games where people meet regularly once a week and they only play that game. And I think that's amazing. I think more people should do that. But I don't think we should be designing for that use case. Right. And as much as I love Race for the Galaxy, it's a game that was designed to be a game you play on repeat over and over as like almost your exclusive game. The number of times that I've heard like, yeah, I love Race for the Galaxy, but it took me like 20 plays to really get into it. I don't think that modern board games would ever succeed if they had gone with the same model that Race for the Galaxy did. I think the reason that Race for the Galaxy was successful was because it came out at a time where there weren't really many games like it around, and people were willing to put in that time. And since then, it's developed that following. But like, can you imagine a game with the icons that Race has coming out nowadays? People would just be like, too much, I'm done.
Well, except for you.
I guess so, maybe.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's even saying that there is a lot of these icons in modern games, but I don't think anything gets as far-fetched as Race does. So let's talk about that. Like, a lot of Euros nowadays have these icons for budgeting reasons. And there are cons to this. One is kind of one that you alluded to. It's like, if you start to have a lot of them and you basically have to look at a reference sheet, which is the equivalent of having to like look at a card to interpret it. This is not the case when there's only a few icons, but when you have like 16, when basically the back of your rule book is like just a glossary of icons, you're basically just passing around the back of the rule book from turn to turn and trying to understand this. The one that comes to mind for me is Arc Nova.
Oh, yeah.
Arc Nova just has like so many different icons. Some of them that only appear on like 4 or 5 cards in like a 200, 300 card deck. I would argue sometimes they do a good job of explaining them on the card, but other times they're just there. And you're like, I don't know what this is. Why is this on here? The other thing that can be really annoying about these icons is that sometimes they lead to misunderstandings about how the game works because you assume you know what an icon means, but you actually don't. And the number one example I can think of for this is when there is a wild cost / wild resource. I can't tell you the number of times that people misunderstand that you could pay for this with any number of or any type of resource, and then the actual meaning was you gain one resource of any type, or vice versa. How do you represent that other than having like the text to indicate it? Sometimes people do it by showing the outline of the symbol in green or the outline of symbol in red. But again, that requires you to be able to tell the difference between those colors. A lot of people are colorblind. I also would argue that a lot of people miss that, and they're not going to see the red border surrounding that icon if you're supposed to be spending that. The other example that comes up quite a bit is when you gain a temporary resource or money versus when you gain a permanent of that money. So there'll be a symbol that's like gain a coin, and then there'll be another symbol that's like gain an additional spending as if you had a coin for this turn.
Love that.
Those are not very clear. And that always throws off people who are new to a game. So yeah, there's problems with symbology in terms of like interpretation too, not just like not knowing them, but just misunderstanding them.
You know what I think is funny about the universe or the wild card symbol? I just had this experience yesterday playing Daybreak.
Yeah.
Where she thought that the icon meant that she got she got a resource that could be used as any of the 3 colors. Not that she got a resource that she had to pick between the 3 colors when she received it.
Oh, that's another thing, yeah.
Yeah, it's another thing. Again, you can almost take it for granted.
I think that the icons can be very new player unfriendly or just not be very friendly to new players.
Right.
So the last con I have here before we kind of like talk about specific games and our thoughts on them is the icon overload / I can't understand or learn this game now effect. It can be really intimidating to new players to have so many icons. Like a number of people in our group have expressed this, where they immediately get turned off to a game when they see a bunch of icons. I think Taylor in the past has said, like, I don't like games with tags. And as we have played games with her, we've actually realized that what she meant by this, and she's spoken about this too, is it's not necessarily the tags, it's the levels of iconography on games like this. When you have icons representing different types or characteristics of a card, and then you have separate icons at the bottom of the card that represent the actions or what happens when you play the card, and then you have additional icons that represent things as simple as like the number of players that you include this card with and things like that. It just starts to become a whole lot and make the game feel like it's more daunting than it is, either from a learning perspective or from a decisioning perspective.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because Helena kind of hates this a lot of the time too. And she often asks me, like, why don't they just, print this out in plain text a lot of the time, especially like reminder cards that are just like the series of icons, And I hadn't even thought to tell her, like, it's mostly a like cost of production issue there. In defense of icons, perhaps a little bit. The goal of them should be very much to translate thought more readily and more quickly. Like in math, as I was talking about earlier, integral. That's a complex concept. And it represents like a certain procedure or idea in mathematics. And
is that the symbol you're talking about?
Yeah.
The integral symbol?
The integral. Okay. So to spell out even just the word integral, when you're trying to get down on paper the idea that I need the integral of this, that, multiplied by this, or something. It's so much faster to write it out in the math glyphs. And it's so much easier if you're well versed in math to understand it as you read it. And I think that's what like these icon driven games should strive for, is like that ease of approach, and not do it for the sake of giving everybody the smallest possible player aid, for example.
Right. Yeah.
Or cutting costs. And I understand it's tough. We're not board game publishers. We're not board game designers. There's all sorts of consideration. Like, it could be really difficult.
You talked about saving space, or, on the reference sheet or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It does take usually less space on a card.
Yeah.
So there is that bonus. I could definitely see an argument for like, you could have a bunch of sentences of text explaining this card, or you could have one or two icons.
But like to what you said, it's like the idea of passing around the icon explaining section of the rule book, or having to go on Board Game Geek to like print off a more useful reminder sheet anyway. It just sort of defeats the effort that you made to come up with all those icons in the first place, right? Yeah, it should be like a natural extension of your thoughts as a player or as a designer. And I think it should very much be driven by play testing, I think, probably more than anything.
So we've talked about innovation, and we've talked about race for the galaxy. So those are the two opposite ends of the sliding scale. I'm going to throw a few games at you, Tom, and you tell me what your thoughts are. So immediately following innovation, we have Magic the Gathering. Ooh. Magic the Gathering doesn't have any symbology, but it does. Well, it does use symbology for the mana, for the resource.
Right.
And then it also uses key terms. And key terms, I would argue, are in the same space as symbology while still all being text. So what are your thoughts on key terms?
I would take like 1 million keywords in Magic before I would start asking them to turn those keywords into like symbols, because that would probably just be worse. But they are. I mean, like the purpose of them in Magic is to obfuscate rules baggage. And it's become like a bit of a pain point in the Magic community, I think, broadly, that you'll just have cards that will say like Delve 8. And you're just like, what the fuck does that do again? Like, I don't remember. Yeah. And at this point, Magic the Gathering is an app-driven game where the app is just a dictionary. You know what I mean? Like a Magic Wiktionary.
Yeah, you got your tablet on the side?
Yeah. Just to remind yourself what the rules text on your like full art Tesa even says.
I think we're so used to Magic and other collectible card games that we don't even notice how much text there is, and also simultaneously how unintuitive some of the keywords are. Yeah,
like Battle Cry.
But it could really benefit from some modern sensibilities, in my opinion. I simultaneously feel like you could use some icons instead of the word draw or graveyard, which would save space on the card.
Yeah.
And make it easier to understand. And then you could also not be so unintuitive about some of the more complicated terms like delve and stuff like that. Like, I know that they generally, if it's a less common term, they'll have in italics what that term means. So you're like learning it as you play. But then at a certain point, they're like, yeah, people should know what this means at this point. And then they remove it for that next set. And that's where, as somebody who like enjoys playing it from time to time, but doesn't really keep up with everything, I'll always be asking Tom or someone else in the group, like, what does banding mean? Or like whatever the hell the current thing is that I'm having a hard time with. What's the one for clues? Create a clue.
Investigate.
Okay, that's the one I always forget. I'm like, what's investigate? Everybody's like, it's when you create a clue token.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. That one's a little sus on the sus side of things. Yeah. I'll say too, speaking of Magic, this reminds me, there's a way in which I think Magic has made an effort to try and reduce card text. And I think they've done things that have taken it in almost the wrong direction, ironically, to what we're talking about. Because it used to be that cards would always say when it enters the battlefield. Now those cards just say enters because the battlefield was technically redundant. But I think I disagree with them on this. It's like enters the battlefield. For one thing, if I just say like when it enters, I don't know. It just never felt like it rolled off the tongue quite the right way. Enters the battlefield always felt better somehow, just saying it out loud. I might be like alone on this. And then the other thing too is like when you just say enters, it's like it could enter other zones, right? And so it feels vague. It feels like there's something missing there. Not even to mention that it just like if you have old cards mixed with new cards, you'll literally have the same card and it might say enters the battlefield and another one just says enters. You'll be like, enters what?
Right. That's
enters your
point.
mom. Yeah. And so
gotta.
Yeah. Plus there's already a cultural, I think, aspect to the language, which is that we say things like ETB. Well, it's like ETB doesn't mean anything when we don't say enters the battlefield on the cards anymore.
Yeah, we
right?
have the Minecraft effect here. They have such like canonically established things that they can't deviate from them in terms of the design.
It's cultural, like the language. It's good.
We hadn't
of
talked
the
about
game
Minecraft yet
is
this episode,
ingrained with the culture. Yeah, we almost got away from talking about the fucking Minecraft movie for once, but no, we're here. It's still here, and they're still crushing loaves.
Do we want to talk about Mars, terraforming Mars?
Sure. So
terraforming Mars is Icon City. You got tags. You got an icon for every effect, but in very, very small text underneath the icons, they explain for every single card what it does. And so if you're familiar with the game, you can just look at the icons and know what that card does. But if you're not familiar or you're unsure about a particular card, then you look at the text underneath it. And if there's some kind of exception about how a card usually works, they'll put an asterisk next to the icon so that it indicates that you should probably read the text underneath it.
I don't hate it.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to do it. Underwater Cities does this as well. Honestly, this is probably my preferred way to do this. I know that it defeats the whole cost savings idea of the language independent symbology. But from a UI perspective, if we're just talking about approach for the user, this is going to give the user everything they need. It gives them the benefit of the icons, both from like saving space, because usually that text is very, very tiny, like both saving space as well as making it easy to parse. And then if it's not easy to parse or you're not sure, instead of having to look at a reminder sheet, you have it right there on the card. And so the main downside that we've been complaining about is solved by having this information.
Right.
Race for the Galaxy, bless its heart, the art is not that impressive on the game. So the fact that the art takes up like a majority of the card, like they could have done this. They could have had each symbol and then in tiny text next to the symbol say like what that symbol means.
Yeah, but then you lose out on that epic like 2000s computer CG aesthetic,
like that Netrunner original CGI art.
Yeah,
Transformers Beast Wars.
Yeah, Beast Wars, that is what it looks like. I don't know, I feel like I do slightly disagree with the idea of like just shrinking art on the cards. Like if anything, the cards should just be nothing but the art with like one small text box that has a plus symbol and the resources you get from it. But of course, like race is a more complicated like game system than that.
Yeah, it depends on the game too.
Yeah.
Like if the game's simple enough that you can do that, great. But like race is just trying to be like no text when it really could benefit from it.
Yeah, I think they could have probably found space for a little bit more description of some of the more complex ideas in race. I think that like a lot of the icons in race generally work with just a bit of explanation, but then yeah, there's like a lot of complexities that they tried their best to like use a bunch of icons to describe when they could have probably just spelled it out in less effort.
I think all the games that we've mentioned so far are games that we enjoy. So this isn't really a case of like games are good or bad depending on this. I'm just saying like you could definitely benefit from some explanation in certain cases. And like if we're like to make a recommendation as far as like our preferred method, it's going to depend on the game, but like I really do think that the Mars version is the way to go. Extremely tiny text that explains what the icons do, and then large icons.
Yeah, I think in general, games do well when like the icons convey the simple, the elegant, like building block thoughts of your game. And then if you find yourself making like a complex sort of compound interaction, that's when you just break out the old words. Yeah. Spell it out for people. Or like Kenny said, like just use that as reminder text, right? Because it's not, you can't rely too heavily on the icons. And I personally also hate the idea of having to pull out the appendix or the index every time.
Yeah. Yeah, as a rule of thumb, the reference sheet shouldn't be a substitute for understanding the game.
Mm-hmm. Somehow we just got through that entire episode without talking about City of Six Moons.
Yep. New game alert.
That's a game where there's only symbols.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the point of the game, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of games where you accidentally end up playing City of Six Moons.
Right, yeah.
Do you think Amabel Holland came up with that game because she was trying to like play race again after like many years?
Yeah, Amabel Holland was playing Race for the Galaxy. She was like, you know what this game could have done is just gotten rid of the rule book completely. Yeah, I think that's gonna do it for this week. We've yapped long enough. I need my nap. That's gonna do it for this episode. Thank you everybody who listened through all of that. Thank you especially to Michael, Tyler, Devon, and Josh of the Boise RainBeaus for your awesome segue music, and thank you to Bonehouse for letting us use your song.
Jesus Christ, are you melting over there?
As our opening theme. Am I melting? I was stretching. Should I redo it?
You were stretching? No, that's okay. As long as the audience has context for why you're like losing it.
You know, you tune into this because you don't want the professionalism, and that's why.
If you're loving the cast, share it with a friend, or on Reddit, or on BGG. If you do, let us know, and we'll send you a shelf-stable micro badge. Just email us. You can reach out to us directly at shelfstablecast@gmail.com. All of this and more available in the show notes. Tom, we got a potentially special topic next week. We're going to be talking about organizing your collection and the rabbit hole that you can get into doing that.
Oh boy, it's always a good sign when Kenny's already picked the topic for us. You know what that might mean? Probably surprises.
Thanks, folks. Bye.
See you.